Hello, everybody. I'm Natasha Kirchek. I'm the host of Global Eye, a hit daily international news show on I-24 News, and I'm honored to be your host today. Welcome to the first ever panel, Dismantling Anti-Semitism, Jews Talk Justice. Now, we're live from Tel Aviv with guests joining us from all over the world, from New Mexico to Los Angeles to Jerusalem, and we're so excited to have you joining us on today's journey to get the facts straight about anti-Semitism and take control of our story and our history. Now, this event has been organized by the organization's Combat Anti-Semitism Movement and the Tel Aviv Institute to give us all an opportunity to speak with some of the most leading and influential voices in the fight for Jewish justice. And the best part about today's event is that you get to be a part of it. We're live streaming from Facebook, from Twitter, from YouTube, and on Zoom. And we want to hear what you have to say. If you have any questions, comments, or you just want to let us know where you're watching from, please comment below. We have a team making sure to gather your questions so that we can hopefully have them answered by our panelists. And don't forget to comment using our hashtag JewsTalkJustice to make sure that we don't miss you. Now, this event comes just one day after a panel called Dismantling Anti-Semitism, Winning Justice was organized by organizations including the Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now, and JFREJ. Now, panelists including U.S. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and journalist Peter Beinart were asked to lead the discussion on oppression, but it was viewed as very unsettling by lots of Jewish people who felt that many of the voices on that panel have histories of anti-Semitic behavior of their own and shouldn't be given this kind of platform. Well, we're going to be discussing that and more later on, but first, let's take a look at some quick facts about anti-Semitism today. I'm joined now by senior fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute, Chen Mazig. So, Chen, anti-Semitism has really been rising around the world in recent years. Break down some of the most recent incidents.
So we all remember how on December 10th, 2019, a gunman walked into a kosher deli and killed among others, two Jewish Orthodox people. Just a few days later, a man holding a machete broke into a rabbi's home in Monsey, New York, wounding 5 people and killing a rabbi that after a long coma just passed away a few months ago. And more recent examples, like just this past Saturday, just on the lawn of Chabad of University of Kentucky campus, a black SUV stopped by and a man shouting anti-Semitic slurs towards the rabbi grabbed one of the Jewish community members and dragged him. Just 4 days ago in Idaho, Anne Frank Memorial that was defaced with Nazi swastika. So these incidents are very recent, and we're seeing a serious and worrying increase.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that increase. What are some of the statistics? What's a bigger picture here of what's happening?
Yeah, so, while those incidents are horrific, we know that it's not isolated. And in the Tel Aviv Institute, we are monitoring those events, and we're looking at different data, like the ADL annual report in 2019 that found that there was 56% of increase in assaults with 5 fatalities and 2,100 acts of anti-Semitic hate in 2019 alone. The ADL also found that about 26% of the world population from the countries they've surveyed globally harbor anti-Semitic attitudes.
Wow.
So this is happening all over the world, and the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights reported that there's increase in hate crimes against Jews in the EU.
Wow.
The widespread thing is the conspiracy theories that are blaming Jews for spreading the coronavirus these days, and it's
of course we've heard that.
Yeah, absolutely horrific. We see this hate, but it's not limited to one political wing. It comes from everywhere. It was also spread in progressive circles, like we saw last year with the Dyke March in DC that banned flags with Jewish stars on them. Which was horrific, and it's even getting to Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, an example, that had to delete a few tweets before because she was accused of anti-Semitism by Jewish organizations and Jewish voices online, which her deleting it sends us a strong message. So just as omnipresent as anti-Semitism is, so are the people who engage in it.
All right, Ken, well, thank you for that breakdown. Obviously, this kind of clarifies why it's so important for us to be here today. So how do we combat rising anti-Semitism? I'd like to welcome several powerful guest speakers who are committed to dismantling Jewish oppression and fighting for justice. We have activist Natan Sharansky joining us. We have the U.S. Assistant Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism, Eli Kohanim, Craig Dershowitz, the CEO of Artists for Israel, and Anila Ali, the president and founder of the American Muslim and Multi-Faith Women's Empowerment Council. Now, before we turn to our guests, I'd also like to introduce Juri, an internationally renowned Japanese-American artist who is going to be painting a piece of art live throughout this entire broadcast. There she is. Juri received the 29 Emma Lazarus Combat Anti-Semitism Award for her artwork, and her creation today will feature Chiun Sugihara, a Japanese diplomat who saved 6,000 Jews fleeing Europe during World War II. Her painting will be presented at the end of this event, so make sure to stick around so you don't miss it. And she's going to tell us a lot more about who she's painting. Now, Eli Kohanim, I would like to turn to you first. You are the U.S. Assistant Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism. You have a very, very unique story of your own. Can you tell us a bit about your background?
Hi, good afternoon. And it's just my pleasure to join the Combat Anti-Semitism movement and Tel Aviv Institute for this really important conversation. I just want to share with all of you that there's a pernicious new form of anti-Semitism that we're seeing today, which brings together far left forces and radical Islamist forces. And together the aim is to erase Jewish history, misinform the uneducated masses, and malign Jews with false accusations, and then after that target Jews for these very false accusations. I'd like to share a little bit of my own story with you and your audience and how it relates to this form of anti-Semitism. I am a Jew born in Iran with a history that dates back thousands of years when Persian Jews were exiled from Israel, our national homeland, and found our way to Babylonia, ancient Persia, which later became Iran. We lived in this ancient Persia to Iran for thousands of years. And in my family's case, in 1979, there was a radical Islamic revolution, which forced me and our family and 75,000 other Jews to flee our ancient homeland. Why is it that the contemporary anti-Semite wants to erase this history? Erase the facts as we all know them to be true. The reason is, and it's very simple, this erasure of history allows the false accusation that Jews are a white people and have white privilege, that Jews are neo-colonialists who were imported into Israel and have been oppressing the brown-skinned people of the region ever since. What I would tell you is that it's time for Jews, Middle Eastern Jews, and North African Jews to really recapture our voices. We are no longer willing to be silenced, and we need to stand up and really share our history with the world. It's really my pleasure to share that just this weekend, I was in the United Arab Emirates on an official visit, and I had the distinct pleasure of celebrating Hanukkah in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi. And what I witnessed there is something that is so historic. That I know that thousands of Israelis are visiting the Emirates right now, and I encourage more Jews and Israelis to do so. What I witnessed was a public Hanukkah celebration at the Burj Al Khalifa, which is akin to having a concert and a Hanukkah candle lighting in Times Square of New York. That is what we're seeing right now in the Arab Gulf region. And so I think that for all Jewish people to understand that we have true allies in this fight. There are many, many in the Muslim world who are standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the Jewish people. And so it is very important for the West to learn how to distinguish between radical Islamist forces who only want to paint Jews with false accusations and the Muslim voices that we're seeing in the United Arab Emirates, in Bahrain, in Morocco, just today. And those are all countries that have normalized ties with the state of Israel, thanks to the Abraham Accords and the leadership of President Trump and all of their kings and sheikhs in the region. And just today also, I want to share the great news that we received that Saudi Arabia has revised their curricula and their textbooks to remove a tremendous amount of anti-Semitic material. All of these developments are such historic developments. What we're seeing in the Middle East, in essence, is cousins who were separated from each other by the forces of history now being reunited again. And I encourage everyone, we must, all of us people who seek peace and who seek harmony, let us find each other. Let us continue this warm embrace that we're seeing with the Abraham Accords, because I think what this historic development that is playing out in front of our very eyes shows us is that there's a tremendous path forward for peace and harmony for all good people and all people of goodwill for us, our children and grandchildren into the future. Thank you.
All right, Ellie, thank you so much for joining us and you know, hearing about, giving us a bit of your personal story there. It's so important. Now, Craig, I would like to turn to you next. Your organization does some really remarkable work. You fight hate through art by working with artists of all kinds to educate people worldwide about Israel. One of my favorite projects that you did was Healing Ink, where you brought together some of the world's best tattoo artists to tattoo over 20 survivors of war and terrorism in Israel. So what I would like to know is, what do you make of the surge in anti-Semitism in this day and age, and what is the best way to combat it?
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for allowing me to be here and for that question. And we've now tattooed 150 plus survivors of war and terrorism, both in Israel and around the world. So we're continuing to move forward with that. I think that, and I have a different perspective because I come kind of from, you know, the streets. I grew up in a housing project. I work with graffiti and street and tattoo artists, et cetera. But I think because of that, we need to recognize that the anti-Semitism we're seeing, it's not a monolith. The reason a young man beats up a Hasidic Jew in Brooklyn is different than the reason some kid sitting in his mom's basement repeats right-wing neo-Nazi rhetoric, is different than the reason there's lefty hate for Israel and fake progressives hosting seminars without Jews talking about anti-Semitism. But if I had to find a through line that connected all of these people and all these other bigots that are anti-Israel, I would say that there's one, a form of jealousy, and two, a tension between the perceived power of the Jewish people and the kind of weakness that oftentimes we claim. So I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this because I'm going to ask us to look inwards a little bit. But this comes from my interaction with thousands of artists, thousands of non-Jewish, Black, Latinx, et cetera, artists who look at the Jewish people and have told me this point over and over again. It is our own inability to reconcile our success and our strength as others perceive us with our sense of fear, with our sense of this anti-Semitism that's coming. You'll see pro-Israel nonprofits post something about a wealthy Jewish businessman who's taking over the world with new technology, and then the next they'll talk about how we're under attack and threatened. And that message, you know, there's some cognitive dissonance to people who don't understand the Jewish mindset. So it's hard for us to be both victim and hero at the same time. And I think we're responding to that. And a lot of the people who don't know us, who haven't gotten to understand the Jewish community, see that.
It's very interesting what you had to say. I'd like to know what your organization, Artists for Israel, does right now to fight anti-Semitism. What have you seen be the most effective in terms of the projects that you guys have done?
Absolutely. So Artists for Israel, we prevent the spread of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic bigotry. And I want to focus on that prevents the spread. And we heal communities that have been affected by violence in Israel and around the world. So as I mentioned, we've worked with thousands of artists who have created educational artworks in support of Israel on college campuses, in communities from South Africa to Indonesia, back to Israel, where they're ignorant of the people of Israel and the Jewish people in general. And we've brought hundreds of artists to Israel where they've helped heal those who have been affected by terrorism. We have a network of artists that are in 32 countries. And as you mentioned, we tattoo people over the scars that they received in a terrorist attack, or IDF soldiers that were injured in combat. And it gives our artists an opportunity. Yes, they hear about the terrorism, but more they're meeting and seeing the resilience of these people. This person was injured in a terror attack, but he's living, he's fighting, he's thriving in this world. And what's most important is that we have created a name, a reputation, an attraction as being an important voice in graffiti, street art, tattoo, urban photography, urban fashion design, not because we're Israeli, not because we're in a Jewish space, but in general across the world, and people want to be part of that. So what I would say is that there's lots of projects we've done. We paint murals that beautify communities. We painted over bomb shelters. We've created fashion clothing that people wait online for hours on Fairfax Avenue to buy that talks about Israel. But what I want to say is that we're not fighting anti-Semitism. That's not our goal. Instead, we want to prevent it. We're identifying the next influential art forms, the next influential individuals, and we're sharing the love of Israel, the world's only Jewish state, with them. And we've created a beachhead. We don't have to fight anti-Semitism, because in these communities that we claim, there won't be any.
All right. Well, you know, I am a huge fan of your organization's work. Thank you so much for joining us, Craig. I'd like to now turn to our next guest, Anila Ali, the president and founder of the American Muslim and Multi-Faith Women's Empowerment Council. Now, your organization takes on the challenge of internal and external bigotry by empowering Muslim women on the front lines. As a non-Jewish Democrat, what is your perspective on elected officials defining anti-Semitism instead of the Jewish community itself?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on this esteemed panel. Yes, I'm a proud Muslim Democrat, very devoted. And to me, good leadership means being responsible leaders. So confronting issues of bigotry, taking them head on, challenging them, even if they are the unpopular thing to do, well, that's what I believe leadership is all about. And that's what we do at my organization. So we believe that as Muslims, we don't get to define what is anti-Semitism. The Jewish people do. And so we as Muslims, we get to define Islamophobia. We work with the Jewish people to define both, and we counter both of those. Representative Ilhan Omar, when she came out with her anti-Semitic tropes, we challenged her, and we got our Jewish friends to explain to the Muslims who thought, why is that hurtful? And we got our Jewish friends to explain why it's hurtful and the history of it. It all stems from education. So recently, when Representative Tlaib's office was contacted, why her participation in this sham of an anti-Semitism panel, she's fine. They said she's committed to fighting anti-Semitism, but she only called out white nationalists as a source. So it's either her arrogance or it's misdirection that she didn't mention the left-wing anti-Semitism. That omission is very important because she's been on the forefront of progressive anti-Semitism. And that's what we do. We, as responsible Muslims and Jews and Christians in my organization, we challenge that bigotry inside and outside. And so many women like me, many men have been calling me and asking, okay, so explain it to me. And what did she say? And why is it wrong? And a lot of women like me have said, we want to join AMWEC because we don't believe, we think this is wrong. And she does not represent us. And so they're looking for alternative leaders, and they find AMWEC and women like me, they want us to be a majority voice because they don't feel like their voice is represented, and neither is mine. I don't think Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan are representing me and my community. And in fact, I'm saddened by that because they were the Muslim Democrats who were elected, the first ones. They should have made us happy and proud. They didn't. So I think it's a time to take a look at what we're doing in the Democratic Party as well. I ask my leaders all the time, I'm a Muslim, and if I can see it, you should be able to see it too.
Now, what I'd like to ask you, as an American Muslim voice that is also facing bigotry, what is your best advice to the Jewish community when it comes to dealing with such hatred?
Well, first of all, we stand together. You've got to be a role model. So when we were attacked as Muslims, we had our Jewish friends, rabbis from New York called me and said, we're with you. We're going to form a human chain. We must realize that a lot of the Muslims don't know about Judaism. We just had a panel for Hanukkah. They didn't know why Hanukkah is celebrated. And then they said, okay, we want more education. So I think a lot of things start with educating. We need our Jewish friends to come out there, join us, and help us educate our masses that are here that want to learn. They don't know the difference And there's stereotypes, unfortunately, really toxic ones that have been going around. And some of them are like, why don't I'm not anti-Semitic. I like Jews, but I don't like Zionists. Okay, so then we have to go out and explain with the help of our Jewish friends why that is so problematic and it's anti-Semitic anyway. And all the tropes like Benjamin's, why is it wrong? Jews control everything anyway. So we have to, challenge that. And as Muslims, I feel that I have the moral authority to define what is Islamophobic, and you have the moral authority to define what is anti-Semitic, but we need you to join us, help us change that rhetoric. And, within my own Democratic Party, I'm going out there and saying this has to stop. This progressive anti-Semitism is hurting us. It divided us. Look what it did to our political party. We lost seats because of that. More and more Muslims are calling me and saying, look, this is not right. We don't identify with the progressive politics. And, we love America. And we have Jewish friends. We like them. And we want to join you. So, I'm seeing that movement. And I hope that we all get to talk about it, work with Jewish people. We've done vigils, we've done town halls, we've done events that warm the heart, like lighting a Hanukkah candle, and tell us about it and find common ground.
All right, Anila Ali, thank you so much for joining us. Now, I would finally like to turn to a video from human rights activist Natan Sharansky. Let's take a look at what he has to say.
I was born and grew in the Soviet Union, where anti-Semitism was the fact of everyday life. But officially, authorities will never recognize that they are anti-Semites or their policies anti-Semitic. They will always speak about class enemies who are not loyal to Soviet Union, who are loyal to Zionist entity. But at the same time, the pictures of these class enemies, always typically Jewish from Nazi propaganda, and the conversation is about how these people are controlling financially the world, and how historically these people were always betraying the countries in which they live. At the same time, there was very strong propaganda against Israel. And Israel was criticized the extreme forms of demonization, like was the worst state in the world. But demonization of Israel and the legitimization of Israel was hurting Jews exactly as demonization and delegitimization of Jews for 1,000 years of the propaganda. That's why for us in the Soviet Union, this connection between the attempts to demonize Jewish people and the attempts to demonize Jewish state was very obvious. And that's why it was so easy for me to participate in developing the international definition of new anti-Semitism. Why, if you really want to criticize Israel in order to improve its policy, why do you have to demonize Israel? Why do you have to compare Israel with Auschwitz? Why do you have to deny the right of Israel to exist? Why do you have to apply to Israel standards which you never apply to any other country in the world, the most democratic and the most dictatorial? As a Jewish activist in the Soviet Union, I became also involved in human rights causes. I became at the same time the spokesman of Jewish movement and the spokesman of human rights movement. But today, when there is kind of attempt to hijack the cause of human rights from Jews by so-called progressives, it reminds me of my past. There is no such a thing as individual justice. Justice has to be for the group of oppressed, and it has to be directed against oppressors. What it practically means? It practically means that there are the whole groups of people who belong to the right identity and those who belong to the wrong identity. And it's the states who have always to be condemned and the groups of people who always have to be condemned. Jews are guilty in belonging to the wrong state, the state of Israel, to the wrong group, which is responsible for everything from bringing black slaves hundreds of years ago to America, and today bringing foreign office workers to replace American citizens. So it doesn't matter whether this criticism comes from the left or from the right. In both cases, Jews are accused as a group, and Israel is accused as a Jewish state. It has nothing to do with human rights. The international definition of anti-Semitism, which puts red lines, doesn't permit to demonize and legitimize Israel, is very good, because then you can feel very free criticizing Israel without crossing these red lines. But the fact is that those who are behind denial of these definitions are those who really want to destroy Israel. And that's why they do want that Israel will be demonized and delegitimized each time.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. All of your answers were amazing, and obviously it was great to hear from Natan Sharansky. I'd like to now give the floor to some of the viewers who are watching from around the world so that they can ask some questions of their own. We'll take 2 or 3 questions so that we have time to move on to our next panel of incredible guests. So let's hear any questions, guys? All right, it looks like we're not getting, let's see, any sent to us yet. 1 second. Let's see. All right, we're moving on for now. We'll come back to you soon. Don't worry, keep on watching. All right, now, again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us and giving us their insight. In this era of surging bigotry, Jews are facing increased harassment and violence in a movement trying to redefine what anti-Semitism truly means. Our next guests are going to teach us about the damage done by tokenizing only fringe Jewish voices, gaslighting Jews about their own experience, and redefining anti-Semitism into a hollow distraction rather than doing the work to fight it. We have Rabbi Sandra Lawson joining us. She's an activist, a public speaker, and a musician who has been called the Snapchat Rabbi. She serves as associate chaplain for Jewish life at Elon University, and she became the first openly gay female Black rabbi in the world in 2018. We also have Marina Shihe with us. She's an indigenous advocate who belongs to the Tewa people of the northern Rio Grande Pueblos in New Mexico. She's a Sephardic Jew, and today she serves as a legislative advisor to the Al Pueblo Council of Governors for the 20 Native American pueblos of North Mexico and Texas. We have Ashagar Araro joining us. Araro is a prominent Ethiopian-Israeli anti-racism activist who immigrated to Israel from Ethiopia under the Israeli Defense Forces Operation Solomon when she was just an infant. Araro has served in the IDF. She's recently established an Ethiopian heritage center called Betea as well. And finally, we also have Representative Alma Hernandez with us. Alma is an American politician and a Democratic member of the Arizona House of Representatives since January of 2019. She was the first Mexican-American Jew to win an elected position in American history. Alma has a strong history of fighting for the rights of women battling HIV and AIDS as well. And last but not least, she wasn't the last one. We have Chen Mazig with us. He is a senior fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute, an Israeli writer and advocate. He's the son of Iraqi and Tunisian Amazigh Jewish refugees, and his work focuses on advocating for Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. He was chosen as one of Allgemeiner's 100 most influential Jews in the world in 2018, and he's sitting here right with me, so we're very happy to have you here. Now, before I start with some questions, I'd like to remind everybody watching that if you have any questions or comments, just comment below with the hashtag Jews Talk Justice. We promise we'll answer them and do that to make sure that we don't miss you. Our esteemed guests will have the chance to answer your questions a little later on. Before we get to them, though, let's take a look at this short video about the importance of the IRHA definition of anti-Semitism. Take a look.
intent. Yes, yes, yes!
You know, as an Army officer, I know that you can't really confront a threat effectively unless you first define the threat. Well, we have the greatest tool ever to define that threat.
One helpful tool to train law enforcement and educators to identify and combat anti-Semitism is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IRA, definition of anti-Semitism.
This educational tool can help to sensitize individuals, policymakers, and institutions.
And if we can identify anti-Semitism, it makes it that much easier to combat anti-Semitism.
All right, so Chen, the first question is for you. Do you think that anti-Semitism has become a problem in popular social justice movements and the progressive movement as a whole? And how do you think that this needs to be addressed?
It absolutely has become a problem, not only the progressive movement, both on the left and the right. We're seeing anti-Semitism coming from everywhere, from white nationalists, the deadliest one that is coming from there. But also we're seeing it on the left, we're seeing it in the progressive movement, and I believe that as the progressive movement represents so much and the importance of, and look at this panel that we have here, such important voices that are all represented, the diversity of the Jewish community and how we belong to so many different groups and the intersectionality of many of in the Jewish community is super important. And I think that for us, it's just so harmful, and it causes us real distress to feel like our identity is being challenged, and we have to choose between our progressive values and our fight against anti-Semitism. And I mean, it's just disheartening, and it's something that I think another point is that we need to recognize that a lot of other communities, a lot of other marginalized groups are experiencing attacks and racism and hatred towards them. Also, often I see that, not often, but sometimes anti-Semitism is being used as a tool to promote this, and we need to recognize that, and we have to fight against that, and we can't allow anti-Semitism to be used as a tool to harm others. That's for us, I think, for the Jewish community, something that we have to bear in mind, because we need to fight that, and we need to fight it seriously, and we can't allow anyone else to hijack our rights to define anti-Semitism and to fight it.
Absolutely. Now, Sandra, I'd actually like to turn to you, Rabbi Sandra Lawson. First of all, why do you think that anti-Semitism has become a problem in social justice movements and the progressive movement as a whole?
So what I'll say is, I want to just lean on what Chen said, which is that anti-Semitism is a problem that is not a left problem, it's not a right problem. It's, I live in the United States, so I'll center the United States because that's where I am. It is a problem because it's a problem in the United States. And what I've said in other spaces is that I think the Jewish community is in a space right now where the Black community has been for a long time, is we recognize that racism is inherent in our society. It's part of the foundation of the United States. And anti-Semitism is inherent in our society because we live in a Christian society, a Christian-centric society. And therefore, until people start to really take a good hard look at how anti-Semitism is built into our society and is built into Christian hegemony, we're not going to move forward. Yes, there is definitely anti-Semitism on the left, and then yes, there's definitely anti-Semitism on the right because it's not a left-right issue.
Now, Alma, I'd like to ask you a question. How should Jews address anti-Semitism when it comes from people who are members of other marginalized groups? And I think this also relates to what you touched on here, Rabbi. Should there be a difference in calling out anti-Semitism from a person of color or an LGBTQ person versus a more privileged aggressor?
In my opinion, absolutely not. I think regardless of who you are, the color of your skin, what background you come from, if you are engaging in this type of behavior, that's what encourages and emboldens those who are continuing the hateful attacks and the rhetoric against Jews. So I think it should be treated equally regardless of who it comes from and what spaces it's coming from. You know, in my opinion, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, or you consider yourself a progressive or someone from the right wing, it does not matter. If you're engaging in that behavior, it should not be tolerated. And we should not look at it any differently because of who it is that's doing it. It should all be treated equally the same, which is we should not accept it, and we should do what we have to do in order to stop it. You know, it's an issue that we unfortunately have to face a lot within in many of the circles we're a part of. And, you know, yes, there are situations where we have folks who are very passionate, which I'm very passionate as well, but that we shouldn't allow the passion to be what, you know, lets us just let people slide and allow them to say things like this. You know, it's something that we need to continue to fight against within our own circles. And no, it should not be treated differently because of who it is that is saying it.
I'd like to also just say to our panel here, if you have anything that you would like to say, any responses or any questions of your own to one another, please do jump in. I'll be asking questions, but I want you guys to feel comfortable adding to whatever is said here, because I see a lot of nods of yeses, and I don't know if any no's. I didn't see any of those yet, but maybe we'll see something down the line. Okay, so Chen, do you have anything that you'd like to ask in response, or would you like me to move to my next question?
No, just echoing exactly what Rabbi Sandra said and Alma. I mean, it's so important that we treat this as a phenomenon that doesn't know any political wing, and we need to make sure that it's not being utilized and that we're not used as pawns in political fights, because this is the biggest threat to the fight against anti-Semitism, and that's what exactly we're here to fight. We don't want it to be used for politicians. We don't want it to be used by leaders that want to get elected again. It's important that we fight it, no matter where it comes from.
Now, yesterday, Barbara Rasby said that those who support BDS are not the enemy of the Jewish people. Yet over 95% of American Jews are Zionists, according to Pew Research from 2019. So this is very recent. That is just last year. Some would call this a form of gaslighting. Do you think Jews are being gaslighted when it comes to anti-Semitism? And if so, by who and how? Marina, why don't you take that?
I'm sorry.
There we go.
We absolutely are being gaslighted. And I think a lot of the issues come from the fact that the education around who Jews are, where Jews come from, the entire narrative about our own history is felt like it's owned by others. And we see this a lot in indigenous spaces, and with Jews being an indigenous people, we're experiencing nothing different with that. It's just a form of cartoonization, dehumanization, masculinization. But in this space, it's, this political narrative that's espoused. So we're seen as very strong and powerful and incapable of suffering from oppression ourselves. And others are gaslighting us mostly because they have these false definitions and sense of ownership over our realities. I think that additionally, in terms of that, we're not always able individually to speak out and speak up. So I'm very thankful that this group has gotten together to address this, especially against organizations such as that panel last night, as well as the support of the IHRA definition.
Now, Chen, any comments or any responses to that from our panel?
I mean, I just am really happy to see this group. I'm just keeping on being amazed. I think it's one of the most amazing panels I've seen in the Jewish, and I wish every panel would look like this, that we will, we'll bring forward those voices that that often are not heard. And as Marina said, just connecting to that, like, we often feel like we're fighting it by ourselves, but we need to remember that there's many people that are like us out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, also just the diversity of the Jewish people, that's something that we see here, right? And it brings me to a question, a hot button topic, something that we discussed a bit before the show. And, we're seeing that one of the main targets of white supremacists is the Jewish community, yet we're also witnessing a conversation about white privilege within the Jewish community. How can we reconcile white privilege with Jews being killed by white supremacists? Who wants to take that fun one? Asha.
I think, hey.
Go ahead.
So I think, first of all, we have to remember throughout history, Jews were never considered white. People, society, countries didn't view Jews as white, and it always looked as a minority. Even in Ethiopia, as Ethiopian Jew, I know from my family experience, my parents' experience, even though they looked like everyone else, they were Black, they had the same African features, the same language, they were still Jews. They were looked at as Jews. They were called falasha in Amharic, which is the strangers, the other ones. They're being told to go back to their home, although they look like everyone else. And this is not a story that only exists in Ethiopia. It's a story that exists in every country where Jews are the minority. Throughout history, Jews were looked as the others in different society, and we have to acknowledge that, and we have to educate people about that. I think a lot of the hatred we see has come from lack of knowledge. I believe, like in my heart, that people are not born full of hate. They're not born bigots. They are not born like trying to do something bad to a group of people, but they are being taught several ideas or being given several understanding about the world of different groups. And once we understand that and we educate people about who we are as a people and show our diversity, one of the things that the reason that my family and I have decided to build an Ethiopian Israel Heritage Center is not because this is what I had a lot of things going on, and we said, like, what is the most important thing? Like we said, like, what can make people get closer to each other? What can we connect between people? And we said, talking about the stories. Everyone has a story. And once you tell the diversity of the story of your community and your people, you shine a light on that. And this is our responsibility as Jewish community to tell the diverse stories of our community. It could be Ethiopian Jews, North Africans, and every different minorities that we have. It's our responsibility. And by that, just by doing that, we educate people about the fact that Jews are not only white and the diversity in our community and our history.
I see some nodding. Any responses to what Ashagar had to say? Rabbi? Yeah. Let's unmute you. There we go.
I also want to say I was a little nervous when we started, but I just want to say thank you so much for putting this panel together and for having us. And I know I have students watching and parents watching, and so this is pretty cool. And I hope they still think it's cool after.
I think so.
But what I want to say is that, first of all, I know this is a really diverse panel, and I'm really speaking centered for me personally, from my perspective as a Black woman and living in the United States. And to understand white privilege, first of all, you have to understand how whiteness has evolved and who's been allowed white. The first people who came to this country and created this country as the United States were white in the sense that they were from Great Britain. No other European group was allowed into whiteness. You had to generally be white, male, and own property. And you had to be from Great Britain. That meant that Germans, Italians, all those other folks that we now considered white were not allowed into whiteness category. Then over time, those European groups, of course, were allowed into whiteness. And when Jews came to this country, no, Jews were not considered white. But over time, Jews who were coded as white or looked white were allowed into white privilege. That has a lot to do with assimilation. Eastern European Jews assimilated into American culture at a price. And I also want to say that privilege is not about the things you get. Privilege allows you to not see the suffering of others. It allows you to not see or have empathy for others, or not to just be blind to diversity, or be blind who's absent. And so, for Jews who benefit from white privilege, or Jews who present as white, can be white and also suffer from anti-Semitism at the same time. Both those things can be true, which means, yes, you could be white, and at any point in time, that whiteness could be taken away because you're suffering from anti-Semitism.
This is so perfectly said.
Yeah, it's just very well said. Alma, do you have something that you want to say? I kind of see you nodding, and it looks like you have something to say.
Yes, and it kind of goes back to the previous question as well, and I should have probably done this sooner, but I waited a bit. But it all kind of ties together, and I think we have to really be honest here and kind of point out the elephant in the room, right? We have Jews from our own communities who, in my opinion, self-hate and create a lot of these conversations that not only bring hate, but also anger within our community. So I think it's important for us to also acknowledge the fact that we have members of our own community who unfortunately do things that make things worse for us. You see in many different circles. But I'm seeing it a lot recently, especially with the panel yesterday, and just in general, we're noticing that many Jews who are wanting to be a part of something, wanting to feel like they are supporting a cause or being a part of a movement, have really turned and started doing what I call self-hating. And it makes it very difficult for all of us who are trying to combat anti-Semitism and trying to combat all of these issues that we face, when we have people from our own communities who are really bringing a lot of this rhetoric towards us. So I just wanted to mention that, because I think it's important for us to also acknowledge that it's an issue within our own community. And it's not just people from outside the Jewish community, unfortunately, but it's something that really is affecting us. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, unfortunately, we have Jews who sometimes make it worse for our community.
If I can just connect to that, I mean, it's so important to understand that we're not different than any other minority community. I mean, as a gay man, I know that there are gay people that oppose same-sex marriage. There are some people in every community that oppose the civil liberties and the best interests of this minority community. And they often being paraded and pushed forward by the media, and it's done for a specific cause. So we need to stay focused, and we shouldn't, as you said before, we shouldn't get gaslighted. We just need to remember what matters. And those people do not represent us, and we know that.
All right, so we can go off on so many different tangents here. Let's be honest. We have so much that we want to cover. I'd like to talk a bit about the Israel anti-Semitism connection here that we keep on seeing. In many progressive spaces, Israel's become a litmus test of sorts. We've seen Black Lives Matter events ask for no Zionists. We've seen Jewish pride flags banned from the Dyke March and various slut walks, all because they remind people of Israel. Do these bans help or hurt progressive movements? And how do they affect diverse Jews who need support in both that fight against anti-Semitism and other injustices such as homophobia, sexism, and racism, all these topics that we've just mentioned right here? Who'd like to take a stab at that? Asha, let's see. Okay, Alma, there you
go. Here you go.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I was. I apologize.
No worries.
What I was going to say is it. Absolutely, I think it makes things much more difficult. There are many people like myself who identify as a very proud progressive. I also identify as Jewish, and I don't think I should have to leave and check one or the other at the door when I'm trying to be supportive of a movement. It's become something fairly, in my opinion, very rampant and recent within the progressive movement. Again, I'm a very progressive Democrat in Arizona. If you look at my voting record, I mean, everything that I do is pretty progressive. And, being told that I have to choose between being a part of the progressive movement and supporting Israel is just something that I'm not willing to compromise on. And I don't think any of us should have to compromise on that. At the end of the day, you should be able to freely express and support what you do, which is part of the reason why I don't tell people you can't be pro-Palestinian, you can't be pro-Israel, and you can't be progressive. I feel that I'm all of the above, and you can be that, and you shouldn't be told or allowed, to have people change our minds because they don't like the way it looks. And I think at the end of the day, if we continue to allow people to tell us that you have to be one or the other, we're never going to, make any progress. But it is something we're seeing a lot in the progressive movement. Unfortunately, I have to have many conversations with not only colleagues of mine, but also other elected officials who jump on the bandwagon sometimes without realizing how much it affects all of our communities. And I just want to remind people one thing is when we're talking about all these movements, Jews were typically the first ones that were there in support of these, not only progressive issues, but human rights issues. So it's unfortunate that we get left out because we support Israel, and it shouldn't be that way.
Marina, I'd like to hear from you.
I want to say, I'm sorry, that I think it's really important because I also sit at the middle center of progressive spaces. I kind of have to, that whole Black queer thing. But, for me, education is important. And and I'm not making excuses for anti-Semitism, but sometimes it's so ingrained in our society that people often don't know where it comes from. I'll give you a wonderful example. A year or two ago, I had a conversation with a student who made a comment about a Christian student. I believe in the loving God of the New Testament and not the wrath of the God in the Old Testament. And I just said, ouch. And then we had a conversation. But what I unpacked from that conversation is that, I didn't say this to the student, I said this to a staff member, is that's anti-Semitic. That's how ingrained anti-Semitism is in Christian society. And so just educating people in the spaces that we are, the same way that Black people do, the same way that queer people have been doing, why your statement is anti-Semitic, or why I perceive your statement as anti-Semitic, and why this is hurtful, especially if you're in relationship with people. And that's the thing you have to decide. If I want to be in a relationship with someone, and I want to work with someone, then I need to take the time to educate them, because a lot of times people just don't know. And there are differences between just outright hate and outright ignorance. And I'm not interested in having conversations with people who want to hurt me. I am interested in having conversations with people where we're moving towards the same goal, and they just may not have an understanding of history.
Right. Now, Marina, I'd like to give you the floor as well, because you haven't spoken. Then Ashigar, I see you, girl. We're going to get back to you.
Thank you. I was just going to add that the banning of Zionists from these spaces, again, takes authority over our narratives. And the definition of what Zionism is. This is a word that has been used by the Jewish people for over a millennia. It's not something that is just modern popular politics or popular activism. And no one is taking the time to really understand a broader view of these things. I do a lot of education in my own community about how Zionism is just a tribal sovereignty movement, and how this is for the self-determination and preservation of the Jewish people, which is not against anyone else. And understood on those terms, we can move forward in conversations. But if others are trying to place it as, as a point of oppression or an ethno-state supremacy movement, it becomes very difficult to move past that. And so I think collectively, when those bannings happen, especially in these progressive spaces, we do need to speak up more often and more firmly about the fact that these definitions are altogether wrong and problematic and contribute to bigotry. And
Marina, I want to ask you, how is Zionism viewed within the Native American community?
It's very negative. It's very negative. There's just an abundance of anti-Semitism that is guised as anti-Zionism in the Native American community. And that there's a long history of this, stemming from the time of the American Indian movement and people coming in and educating Native Americans that anti-Zionism was representative of the same fight that they are battling here in the United States. So now it's multi-generational. Now parents have taught this to children in some communities. And it was just a wrong definition that was taught to them to begin with. But Native people are very loyal. Again, we're tribal peoples. So people who have come into our communities and made those efforts, we tend to value that outreach, and we don't have that outreach from the Jewish community. We don't have the support for Native issues from the Jewish community, so they're not seeing any other side to it. So it's just a point of ignorance, but it's a difficult one because it is very strong and passionate.
That's very interesting. So Ashager, I want to get to you. I also would like to ask you a question that's related to what I just asked before. How can we help people distinguish between legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism?
In every conversation that I have, a lot of time when I meet with students, it could be very emotional. People come across very aggressive. The first thing that I do is try to calm people down, and I would ask, do you believe in the right of Israel to exist? This is the first question. Do you believe in the right of Israel to exist? We're not talking about the borders. We're not talking about Israel government. We don't talk about anything else. We're talking about the basic right of the Jewish people for self-determination. If you believe in that, if you believe in this value, everything is feasible. You can talk about history. We can talk about position, this or the other. But once you say, I don't believe the Jewish people has the only people that don't have the right for self-determination, for me, this is a sense of anti-Semitism. It's okay to criticize Israel. People who follow me over Facebook and see my Hebrew posts can know that I criticize Israel. It's okay and it's legitimate, and this is what makes Israel a vibrant democracy. But saying that we are the only people that are not allowed to have a self-determination, this is anti-Semitism. When you I talk about Jews, talk over Jews, and not giving Jews the space in order to define their own oppression or own problem or struggles. This is a kind of anti-Semitism, and we need to acknowledge that. And what I wanted to point it out about a previous conversation is that, in my feeling, for so many times, Jews are waiting to be included in the conversation. They're asking for a permission to be a part of this movement, a permission to be in the anti-racist movement, like anti-racist, pro-LGBT community, rather than saying we are not waiting for anyone's permission. These are the values that we believe in. We believe in equality. We believe in anti-racism. We are willing to fight for it. This is our values, and no one, no matter what you believe, can tell us what we can or cannot believe in. You cannot tell us that our religion or our perspective as Zionists can prevent us from standing with you in your fight. And this is something that I strongly believe that we need to stand with every group that we need to stand for the values rather than the cause. We need to stand for the values that we believe in, no matter what other groups tell us.
All right, Ashager, beautiful breakdown, really beautiful breakdown. We have some questions from our viewers that I would like to get to, because I want to make sure that if you're watching, if there's anything that you would like to ask, any comments, anything that you'd like to say, please comment below. There's a hashtag Jews Talk Justice. Don't forget to include that. So we have a question from Daniel in New York City. In my parents' and grandparents' generation, standing up for Israel was a progressive cause, David against Goliath. In my generation, the progressive narrative around Israel has been flipped. Why? Why don't you start with that, Chaim?
Well, that's really important, because it's an important question, because I think this is the basis of everything we're doing. There is a real issue here in Israel. There's a conflict that is happening. There's people that are aspiring for self-determination, and we still have this conflict that is unsolved. And I think that it's important for us to know that this has to be solved. But I don't believe that anti-Semitism is connected to only that. I believe that a lot of people are impressionist and seeing this stuff and feeling, and there is an important issue that we can't ignore with the Palestinians. There's a conflict that we need to address, and I hope that one day we will solve. But I think that everything changed for my family, at least, that they came from Iraq and Tunisia. Back then, it was the whole Middle East and North Africa. It was what it is today. I mean, it still is, but the focus was very wide, and it was from North Africa all the way to the Middle East and going up to Iran. And Israel was what it is today still, but back then it was viewed as this 0.03% of the Middle East. And now everything has changed, and everyone are uber focused only on that. And I think that for me personally, I mean, I think that this issue has to be more broadened, and we have to understand that my family came with trauma from Iraq and North Africa. They were oppressed as Jews. They lived as dhimmis. They were prosecuted for being Jewish. They were never considered as Arabs in Iraq. They were never part of the preferred, the privileged majority in Arab countries, because, as we said before, I mean, they're in a majority-dominated Christian society, white Christian society. This is the preferred person, and the same is in Arab countries and Muslim countries. So I think we have to center this narrative back again and make people understand that this conflict is not just about our fight, our conflict with the Palestinians. It's something much greater that is concerning the whole Middle East and North Africa.
Now, I actually, well, first of all, would anybody like to answer that question as well? No? Okay, let's move on to the next question that we have here from Michelle in Washington, D.C. And then I'd like to get back to less Israel talk, but more of anti-Semitism specifically within the United States. What are the positives and negatives of having anti-Semitism addressed collectively with other forms of racism and not as a unique hatred? That is a question from Michelle in Washington, D.C. Right, Sandra?
Yeah.
Oh, Alma.
I think,
okay, Rabbi. There we go.
Well, what I think is that what my concern is that we get into what I often hear people say is oppression Olympics, and that racism and anti-Semitism, both bad, horrible, function very differently in our society. And speaking generally, racism historically was about capitalism. Black people were brought over in this country as property, as slaves, were not seen as human. And historically, anti-Semitism in our country has to do with scapegoating. And so, especially at hard times, or when a large population of immigrants come or our economy tanks, you see anti-Semitism rise because Jews are scapegoated. And so I think the more that we understand the variety of ways that marginalized groups suffer, instead of putting them under one umbrella, then we can start to tell a fuller story of how our society functions, and we can tell a fuller story of our American history. Anti-Semitism, racism, sexism, xenophobia, I could go on, are all just bad ways that we treat people in our society, and we need to look at all of them, but also see how they play out in our society and how they're designed that we privilege one group of people over another. And also marginalized groups get pitted against each other, so that people who have power and privilege don't have to pay attention to it because we're too busy fighting amongst ourselves.
Yeah, that's such an important point. I'm sorry for interrupting, but everything you're saying, you all are brilliant. But this is an important point. I met this blogger from the UK just last month, and she's a plus-size model, a black woman that speaks about these issues. And she made an ignorant comment a few years ago, and about an anti-Semitic ignorant comment. And I met with her over and over again, and we started working together, and we're still in touch. And I've seen this person really, she was so hurt and it felt so horrible for what she said, but it was really just out of ignorance. And the more we spoke, the more I was open to the type of racism that she's experiencing that I can't see. I mean, I can understand, I can try and I can listen, but I cannot fully understand ever. But that's my work, to listen to what she's telling me and her experience and try to connect to it. But what I've seen from her is that really, that in white-dominated societies, black community is being treated as being dehumanized into a lower level, and Jewish community is being superhumanized, I would say, as if they have superpowers. They control the bank, they control everything, and there's this divide between the black community and the Jewish community that are both being attacked by the same people. They just want us to fight each other, and I think that's really important that we recognize it and not fall for it.
It's very interesting. Alma, I saw that you wanted to say something before I see that hand.
Yeah, just very quickly, I had a bill last year that I introduced here at the legislature in Arizona that would basically adopt the definition that we were just talking about. It became very controversial, as I'm sure you can imagine why. But one of the main things was I was being told by my colleagues that I should add that we shouldn't just focus on, something like the Holocaust, that we should add in all the other issues. So what we did is we ended up adding, defining anti-Semitism and other, I forget the exact name of the bill that we did, but either way, they wanted us to include more, right? More history. But I think it's important for us, as Rabbi Sandra said, we should not take away from what the issue is that we're trying to address, which is anti-Semitism. It's not like any other, I wouldn't want to compare it to any other hate or discrimination that goes around in the country. I think it's its own thing. And I think it's also very troubling that, the recent study, I think it was 2/3 of millennials or a third that don't even know what the Holocaust is, that the Holocaust even happened. Yeah. And that's part of the reason why we need to continue to push for, educating people on what anti-Semitism is, but also the Holocaust, because you can't really explain to people if they're using the hatred and all of the rhetoric that we're hearing, but don't really even know what the Holocaust is or that the Holocaust happened, there's a problem. So, it's part of our duty to do what we can to ensure that we are keeping it separate and its own thing, because it is. We can't mix it with every other issue that we see going around the country, because there's nothing like it. You can't compare people's struggles, and I don't like when people do that. But we need to be able to give everyone their own opportunity and space to share their stories.
Yeah, that's the difference between intersectionality and identity politics. We need to listen to one another. It's not about competing.
All right, so what I'd like to do really quickly before we move on to our next question is just reintroduce everybody who's here for those of the viewers who have just joined in. If you could give us a full screen of our 4 guests on Skype. There we go. Okay, so we have Rabbi Sandra Lawson down in the corner over there. She's an activist, a public speaker, and a musician who's been called the Snapchat Rabbi. And she serves as the Associate Chaplain for Jewish Life at Elon University and became the first openly gay female Black rabbi in the world in 2018. We have Marina Shije up top on the left there. She's an indigenous advocate who belongs to the Tewa people of the northern Rio Grandes Pueblos in New Mexico and is a Sephardic Jew. Today she works as a representative for the Pueblos Council, right, in New Mexico, and represents 20 different Native American communities. We updated your intro here, so sorry if I got that wrong. We also have down in the left corner, Ashagar Araro joining us. She's a prominent Ethiopian Israeli anti-racism activist who immigrated to Israel from Ethiopia under the Israeli Defense Forces Operation Solomon when she was just an infant, and she served in the IDF. She recently also established an Ethiopian Heritage Center called Betea. We have Representative Alma Hernandez with us all the way up on the top on the right. She's an American politician and a Democratic member of the Arizona House of Representatives since January of 2019. She was the first Mexican-American Jew to win an elected position in American history, and she has a very strong history of fighting for the rights of women battling HIV and AIDS. And last but not least, of course, we have Chen Mazig here in the studio with us, guys. He's a senior fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute, an Israeli writer and advocate. He's a son of Iraqi and Tunisian, amazing, Mazig, Jewish refugees, and they're also amazing. His work focuses on advocating for Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, and he was chosen as one of Allgemeiner's 100 most influential Jews in the world in 2018. So I hope that was clear for everybody who didn't hear our introductions beforehand. I'd like to turn to Alma for a question, actually, and then I'm going to get back to some of the questions that we have from guests. Can we pull our ladies up here? Oh, it looks like we lost them for a second.
I'll just add that it's important that everyone will follow all of those activists. It's not that they can, they should follow each one of those incredible women, and you as well. On social media, you can look up their names. I think it's very important to listen to those voices on social media, and I mean, we have an opportunity now that we're all close at home and the internet is the only place we can go to. So, so that's a great opportunity to learn more and to listen to diverse Jews.
For sure. All right, guys. So make sure to follow all of these brilliant women, and of course, Chen. Now, I'd like to ask you, Alma, a question about politics and anti-Semitism. Oftentimes, anti-Semitism is treated as only a right-wing issue or only a left-wing issue, when in fact it takes place on both sides of the aisle. How does anti-Semitism differ within right and left-wing circles? And what kind of anti-Semitism do you think is the most important for us to address?
As I mentioned earlier, I think it should all be treated the same, regardless of who says it. I'll tell you personally, being an elected official and working with members from both sides, I've seen it on both sides. And it's never different. It's the same rhetoric, it's the same type of hate, but used with different words. But it's the same. Ultimately, it ends up being anti-Semitic. I've had members compare from the other side, not from the Democratic side, but from the Republican side, compare my vaccination bills to the Holocaust. I've had members in committee allow me to be called a Nazi because I'm trying to encourage people to vaccinate their children. I've been called some pretty horrible things, but being called a Nazi and being told you're trying to start a Holocaust because you want people to be vaccinated, it makes things difficult when you're trying to work and improving, our communities. And my background's in public health. That's my duty. It's something that I've seen, references when I'm explaining votes after I've spoken. I've had members make comments about how we're not in Germany and make comments of that nature. And it's important that we treat them all the same, regardless of who says it, when they say it, and what side of the political aisle they're on. It's wrong. It should be called out. I call it out constantly. There's been situations where my microphone has been cut off when we're debating because I've been very upset and I've called out certain folks for the things that they have said. But I'm very unapologetic about it. And I think we all should be. We shouldn't allow, just because you're a member of the certain party, to just go along just because you're a member of the party. You have to call it out when it's wrong. So.
All right. Well, I have another question for everybody. This is from a viewer. And after that, we are going to turn to our incredible artist, Jory, who has been working throughout this entire live show to create something beautiful for us. So we have a question from Arthur from Boston. His question is, how do we support the wider anti-racism movement while also addressing an emerging trend in anti-Semitism coming from certain Black celebrities like Ice Cube, Nick Cannon, Deshaun Jackson, and stemming from Louis Farrakhan? Who would like to answer that?
There
we go, Shagar, there you are.
I think, first of all, it's our responsibility to build bridges. We shouldn't talk about the Black community only when it comes with anti-Semitism. We should be allies to the Black community no matter what. When we see the Black community being suffered by police brutality, racism, or discrimination in any way, we as Jewish community, we as people need to stand up and speak up. When the only time we have a conversation with the Black community is related to our needs and our suffrage or our problem, that makes us look bad. That makes us look like we only care about our issue. So real allyship starts when you care about the other person. So I feel like this is the first step. The second thing, I would say, you can criticize minority voices in the Black community and call them out without hurting the Black community as a whole. I can call out Ice Cube for his anti-Semitic remark and still be an anti-racist activist. One doesn't negate the other. And we should talk about it, and we shouldn't be ashamed about it. We shouldn't be shamed out of the conversation. I feel like a lot of times Jews are embarrassed or don't want to be perceived in some way, so they will shy away from the conversation. And we should speak up. We should say what is on our mind and call out people who act in anti-Semitic views. But at the same time, we should be truly allies and care about the issues that this community is facing.
I also want to add, thank you, Asha. I want to add just a little bit, a little personal narrative here. I'm not a celebrity watcher, and that football player and like those other folks that you mentioned, when that football player said, whatever he said. And I had a number of white Jews send me his comments and with like, what do you think about this? I'm like, first of all, why are you sending this to me? And it's clearly anti-Semitic. So what's your point? The reason I'm bringing this up is that when Black and brown people say things that are anti-Semitic and then sending it to the one Black Jew that you know, or the few Black Jews that you know, it's presenting this idea that I'm also not hurt by these comments. And so, and I just like, which I've said before, and we've all been saying that, people in this country are worldwide are anti-Semitic because we live predominantly in a Christian-centric societies. And anti-Semitism is old, it's ancient, and many people often don't know where it's coming from. But just saying that, like, just from a personal narrative, people send me those messages that I wouldn't see otherwise, and then wanting me to say that it's anti-Semitic when it's clearly anti-Semitic.
All right. Well, Rabbi, I want to say to each of our guests here, finally, we can see you all together. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and give us your insight. Everyone comes from such unique backgrounds. And before we end our time with you, we would like to actually ask you to give your Hanukkah wishes. We are in the midst of the Jewish holiday of miracles, of course. We can't leave that out of this conversation. So what are your hopes, your wishes for the future? Every person has the right to answer with 1 to 2 sentences, nothing more, because unfortunately we've got to wrap up, so keep it short. Why don't we start with Ashagir?
Okay, I just had a birthday this Friday, so I had a lot of wishes. Thank you. I'm 30 years old. How crazy is that?
No way. You look great.
Thank you. This is the black skin, Okay, so I think when we came and built the Beta Center, it was all about education and create a connection between people. So for next year, I hope to educate as many people as possible and connect and truly connect with many people as possible. This is the only thing that I wish for myself.
Alma, what about you?
Sorry, I was muted. I really would like us to wake up one day and not have to deal with this nonsense of anti-Semitic rhetoric, especially in politics. I really hope that moving forward, we see less of it.
Marina, what about you?
Hanukkah was a revolution. It was a revolution that renewed our people. And I think in our own lives, we all can find ways that we can replicate, those revolutionary acts, and that we can take efforts to renew and restore ourselves as the Jewish people and our place within the rest of the world.
Beautiful. Rabbi Sandra Lawson?
Hanukkah begins on the 25th of Kislev. Christmas begins on the 25th of December. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not. And as the days get darker here, this has been a really sucky year in a lot of ways. Pandemic, people demonstrating, realizing our society is not equitable. And the season of lights, whether it's Hanukkah or Christmas, reminds us to put more light into the world and reminds us that light is holy. And so I want more light and move into the world as we move into the secular new year.
I'm all for that. Craig, what about you?
I have 2. First is that I hope, like we learned from the Maccabees and like the work of Artists for Israel, we recognize and begin to manifest our power, both individually and as Jews. And I hope that both my 2-year-old and I survive quarantine together. One of us is making it out. We'll see which one it is.
We'll check in on you in a couple of weeks. We'll see what's up. Anila, what about you?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, most merciful, I send warmest greetings to the Jews celebrating Hanukkah throughout the world and in the United States, many of whom are my friends. And I say, I hope this miracle of Hanukkah, the lighting of this candle, brings education, because my rabbi friend told me it has roots in that. And let's educate each other about our culture and our religion and our faith and its practices. So wishing you, your Muslim sister here.
Beautiful. And finally, last but not least, we also do have Chen here, Eli Kohanim.
Hi there. So following my sister Anila Ali, I'm all about the Abraham Accords and this visit that I saw miracles happening in front of my eyes in the Gulf region. And so my wish for all of us for Hanukkah and every year after that is that the light that is spreading in the Middle East truly spreads to every corner of the globe, because today Jews walking in the streets of Dubai are safer than those Jews walking in the streets of Europe. So I hope that the brothership and sistership between Jews and Muslims in the Middle East can really serve as a model for people everywhere. And so wishing everyone happy Hanukkah.
Beautiful. And Chen, we can't forget you.
Well, I wish I could keep this panel going for another 2 hours. But honestly, I mean, everyone that we just heard today is just incredible and so inspirational. And I think my hope is that us as Jewish community will start listening to everyone, that will, allow representation to everyone and make sure that no Jew feels like he's left behind, and that, we'll fight anti-Semitism until it's over.
Beautiful. I mean, I think that's an important statement that needed to be said, especially as we wrap up this session. I'd like to thank all of our guests, Eli Kohanim, Anila Ali, Asha Guerrero, Alma Hernandez, Craig Dershowitz, Rabbi Sandra Lawson, and Marina Shiche for joining us and giving us your insight. You're just all brilliant. It was amazing. It was amazing. Follow them, guys. Follow them online. Now, before we end the show, let's turn back to Juri, our artist who has been busily painting throughout this entire event. Show us and tell us what you've done and why you have painted this specific individual.
Okay, come over here. So I am a Japanese artist and muralist, and who I'm painting today is Sugihara Chiune-san. He was a Japanese diplomat during World War II in Lithuania, and he actually issued so many illegal visas for Jews to flee Europe. He defied the wishes of the Japanese government to get these people to safety. So he's one of my heroes, so wanted to paint him.
That's beautiful. And what does it mean for you to be able to take part in this event and paint something for the viewers? Is there any message that you'd like to send?
I guess maybe for people who might feel unrelated to this topic, maybe Japanese or artists, maybe who have never been to Israel, to just keep an open mind and don't go along with whatever seems trendy, but see for yourself. Like, I've been to Israel with Craig's organization to paint, to really see for myself. And like people said earlier, a lot of the hatred comes from misinformation.
Beautiful.
So, and let me bring it closer so you can see, because it's hard to see back there.
Yeah, please do. I think we'd like to see all the details here. Wow.
Oops.
Look at that.
So
she's been painting this over the course of it's crazy that you did this within so little time. I mean, it's just amazing.
It was kind of hard. And this is a stamp from the actual visas.
Wow.
And then let me see, and here's, I'm not good at doing this webcam, but here's some text from one of the visas of somebody I was able to meet that showed me her visa for her family.
Wow. This is just beautiful. And of course, everybody, you can check out Juri's work online as well. Thank you so much for joining us and creating this masterpiece for us so that we have something pretty to look at the end of this event. All right, my friends, that is it. That's it for our live today. We would like to thank all of our guests and our viewers for joining us today for our first ever panel, Dismantling Anti-Semitism, Jews Talk Justice. Hopefully you've been able to gain some tools and some insight as to how to combat anti-Semitism in the future. And this event has been organized by the organization's Combat Anti-Semitism Movement and the Tel Aviv Institute. More than 300,000 individuals from all over the world have joined the movement. And I invite all of you who are watching today to take a moment, visit combatantisemitism.org and sign the pledge. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, Chen Mazig sitting with me over here. Thank you guys so much for joining us and have a lovely, lovely night. Take care.